Hello again, everybody, and welcome to my second review of the second season of Game of Thrones. And for those of you who haven't watched my other reviews, the first question I always ask when I watch a review is this a book person or a show person? So I will get that out of the way right now. I watched the first two seasons first, then I read the first book, then I watched season 3 and 4, then I read the second book, and I'm probably going to be starting the third book soon, like in the next couple weeks, but I don't like reading ahead. Of course, that causes problems because by the end of season 4, half the characters are in book 5, half of them are in book 4, half of them are still in book 3, so it's a little difficult to tell what reading ahead is at that point. But anyway, just so you know where I'm coming from, I consider myself a show watcher, but I have read the first two books, and I read a lot of articles and wiki entries about various parts of the lore and history. So when I do the reviews, I go over what happened in the show while showing the screen caps, give my thoughts and opinions, and then give some relevant background information that might be left out of the show. So with that all being said, we'll go ahead and get into the second episode, and this time I'm going to try to do it a little differently. I'm going to try to sorry about that. I'm going to try to not look at my notes as much because I take notes of all the important stuff that happens and then end up with like 5 pages of notes because everything's important. But then when I start trying to follow those, I don't necessarily get to say everything I want to say. So we'll see how that works. Anyway, this is episode 202 and it's called The Nightlands. And we are going to go ahead and get into it right now. And the very first scene of the episode is, of course, Arya on her road trip with the Night's Watch. And she's off by herself going to the bathroom so nobody knows she's a girl. And she comes back to the camp and she gets beckoned over to the cage the 3 men are in. And this is where we first meet Rorge, Biter, and Jaqen Hagar. And of course, 2 of those characters are a little less fun than the third one. Jaqen Hagar. So where we first meet him in this episode. And he says he is from Lorath. A lot of people think he's from Bravos, but he's from Lorath. But they're all the free cities over in Essos, which is where Dany is. Anyway, they're asking her for a drink. And Rorge and Biter are being very rude and making unpleasant threats towards her. Well, Rorge is. Biter just growls and snarls and stuff. But Jaqen is being polite and civil, and he talks a lot like Syrio Forel. And he was in the Black Cells in the Red Keep. We still don't know where Syrio went after that fight. But anyway, the people with theories will know why I mentioned those 2 together. But anyway, so Jaqen is trying to get her to give them water, and of course Rorge wants beer and is threatening her, and she is talking back to them, and Jaqen just finds it amusing. He's like, the boy has more courage than sense, because at this point she's supposed to be Arya the orphan boy. That is her new identity. But anyway, that is our little intro to them. She ends up walking away because Rorge and Biter, well, at least Rorge is being very rude to her. But Jaqen finds it all amusing that she talks back to them. He finds her interesting, as most of the people who watch the show do. But anyway, then as she's walking away from them, she runs into Gendry, and he reminds her that Yoren said not to talk to them. And she says, oh, I'm not scared of them. And Gendry's like, then you're stupid. So anyway, then we get the City Watch, the Gold Cloaks. Because if you remember at the end of the last episode, the Gold Cloaks went on a bit of a killing spree and murdered every single one of Robert's bastard children. And that's what Gendry is as well. So now the City Watch was told by Tobomot, who Gendry worked for, that his name is Gendry and he has a bull's head helm, and he went with the Night's Watch, so they're coming after the Night's Watch to find Gendry. And of course Yoren says, we don't answer to any kings. All these boys belong to the Night's Watch, and that makes them outside the reach of kings. So obviously once you join the Night's Watch, whatever you've done before, or whoever you were before, no longer counts, and that's just another reminder of that. But Yorn is not having any of it, and the City's Watch guy tries to be threatening, and before he even gets his sword out, Yorn's got a dagger at his thigh, where the femoral artery is, that one, and he talks about how most people pay so much attention to their throats they forget about what's down below, and he said within a second he could cut that artery and nobody'd be able to, well, he says nick the artery, and nobody here knows how to unnick it, so you better just leave. So Yorn has not given up anybody, and threatening them to get rid of them. And the whole time this is going on, Arya and Gendry are hiding, and Arya thinks they're after her. And then, of course, they say that they're after a bastard boy named Gendry with a bull's head helmet, and Arya just looks at Gendry like, what? Why are they after you? Because she was sure they were after her, because, she's Arya Stark. But apparently, they were after Gendry, and of course they made that announcement to everybody there to try to get them to turn him in. And so Arya is finding it strange that they're after Gendry, and Gendry doesn't even get why they're after him or Arya. But now everybody in the Night's Watch knows that they're after Gendry, so. Then we go back to King's Landing, and Varys is having a little lunch date or whatever with Shay. So Varys has already found out about Shay, and Tyrion comes back to the quarters and finds him there, and he's none too amused. And Varys basically, in his little passive-aggressive way, he's like, what a lovely friend you have. Friends are so important. Too bad your father didn't want her here. But I'm very good at keeping secrets from my good friends. So, yeah, he's doing his little veiled threats about, oh, I know something about you. So, just to have something over Tyrion. And Tyrion is not impressed by it. The scene basically ends with Varys about to leave, and Tyrion stops him at the door and tells him all quiet, I don't like threats. Don't threaten me. And Varys like, who's threatening you? And he tells him that he is not Ned Stark. He knows how this game is played. And he said, Ned is honorable. I'm not. Is what he tells Varys. And he says, if you threaten me again, I'll have you thrown into the sea. He basically just puts it out to Varys like that. He does not, he thinks basically Varys is trying to blackmail him, which I guess, in a way, it could seem like that. Although I think this is kind of another instance of the way Varys gets allegiance from people and creates allies, but that's just a theory of mine about why he did this, to let Tyrion know, this is how it is. But anyway, Tyrion says, if you threaten me again, I'll have you thrown into the sea. And Varys has a little line here at the end before he leaves, where he says that Tyrion may be surprised at the results. That storms come and go, but he keeps on paddling. Which kind of goes back to what he had told Ned on a few occasions about, I just play the part of this guy so I continue to survive and continue to be here and do what I need to do to make the realm a better place. And it just is the way he operates. Nobody trusts him, but he still manages to keep any suspicion from really coming home to him. Self-preservation is a big thing with him. But then we go to the small council meeting. And Elton Lannister, this guy, he has come with Robb's terms. And Robb's terms are that, he wants to be a free kingdom of the north and all of that, and he wants Ned's bones, and he wants his people's bones, and the people from the small council, or the King's Landing will never set foot in the North, and they want Northern independence and all that. And of course Cersei rips up the paper, and Tyrion has that line. He says, "You've perfected the art of tearing up papers." Because this is, like, I think the third time she's done that now. Anytime a paper says something she doesn't want to hear, she just tears it up, pretends it doesn't exist. And so, she asks Alton if he saw Jaime, and he said that Jaime's spirit's not broken, and she tells him to tell Jaime that he's not been forgotten. And then they get another letter from the Night's Watch, and they just assume it's about wildlings or whatever. And according to the letter, the wildlings have stopped killing each other and have actually joined forces behind somebody called the King Beyond the Wall, who we know as Mance Rayder. And Cersei's like, what is that, 5 kings now? So, the War of 5 Kings. I never really considered Mance part of that war, but hey, whatever. Anyway, and in the letter, the Lord Commander Mormont requests more men, and Cersei says, we're at war, we can't afford to send any more men, whatever. And she's like, oh, I have every confidence that the men from the Night's Watch will protect us. And the letter goes on to say that a dead man rose and came back and attacked them. And of course they all read it off as Northerners' superstitions, and Tyrion says, oh, well, yeah, I've met Mormont, though, he doesn't lie. So they're all not taking it seriously, as usual. Nobody in the South believes that there's really problems, and of course Cersei makes the little dig at Tyrion for, oh, 1 trip to the Wall, and you come back believing in grumpkins and snarks, or whatever. So the Night's Watch asks for help, and of course everybody's ignoring them. Now, back to the Night's Watch. And they're having a lovely discussion you'd probably hear in junior high, or whatever. but they're talking about, you know, people farting when they die, and, you know, intelligent stuff like that. And Sam's completely ignoring Dolorset and Gren's little intelligent discussion, and watching all the girls. And he says, isn't it kind of greedy to have so many wives? Because they're still at Craster's, where he's got all of his daughter wives. He said, wouldn't 2 or 3 be enough? And Dolores said, weren't we having a serious discussion? Obviously they weren't. But anyway, but Sam's just watching the girls, and that's all he's thinking about. Poor Sam. He's such the little horn dog, and just isn't getting anywhere here. But anyway, speaking of girls, then we get a little more from the girl that Sam has the most interest in. And he hears her scream, and basically what's happened is that Ghost has come up to Gilly, which she, of course, is terrified of Ghost, because Ghost is big. He's really big. But Sam shoos him away and starts talking to Gilly. And then, basically, Sam's discussion with Gilly leads to him shooing Ghost away, and her saying, oh, you're brave. Whatever. Sam. And that, of course, gets him thinking, and he can tell that Gilly is scared. She says, oh, you shouldn't touch me, and then just runs off. And so she's obviously terrified of her father as well. But I guess what happens here is they have a little off-screen discussion, which makes sense because Sam wasn't a point-of-view character in Book 2, so the discussion is off-screen. But whatever is said in this discussion, we can pretty much get it from the next conversation we see from Sam and Jon. And the gist of this is that Gilly is pregnant, and she's scared, and Sam wants Jon to help him steal Gilly away from her father. And Jon's like, are you crazy? He cuts off a hand for touching his wife. What do you think he cuts off for stealing his wife? And Sam's like, well, she's not a goat. We can't steal her. She's a person. But the point is, Gilly's terrified by the fact that she's pregnant, and she wants Sam and Jon to get her out of there. And it comes down to finding out. She tells Jon, I'm pregnant, and if it's a boy, and she doesn't finish the sentence. And Jon's like, not wanting to help, for obvious reasons. And Gilly tries to tell him that, but then doesn't finish her statement and runs off, and Jon's like, if it's a boy, what? What about if it's a boy? And she rushes off, and Jon's trying to make sense of this. He's like, who's going to deliver the baby anyway, even if we did take her? Which is just ridiculous in itself. And Sam's like, oh, well, I read about delivering babies. Sam's read about everything. But Sam's trying to get Jon to go along with this, and Jon's trying to make sense and saying why they can't go along with it. And you can see that Jon wants to know what she's so scared of before he, risks their lives, basically, trying to help her. He wants to know, what is it that we're trying to save her from? He wants some answers. So, and of course, she's not giving the answers, so they can't really find out what those answers are. And then we go back to the completely opposite temperatures, and we're back in the Red Wastes, with what's left of Dany's Khalasar, and they're still, you can see, in a bad way, starving and thirsty, and this is after she had sent the 3 Blood Riders out in different directions to find any signs of life or any hope for food or water or whatever. And then Rhaegaro's horse comes back. Not Rhaegar, but his horse. And Jorah goes over, and in the bag that's on the horse, you can see some blood dripping out. And it turns out that in the little bag is Rhaegaro's head. Just his head. And his braids have been cut off and everything. So, he didn't have much luck. Yeah, get that real quick there. And, and Dany's, of course, upset by this. And because, she's the one that sent him out, so, of course, she blames herself for what happened to him. And Jorah suggested it's probably another Khalasar that did this, because the other call that's now running the rest of the Dothraki people doesn't approve of any of the Dothraki following a woman like Dany. So, that's their warning. But you can see that Irri comes over when she sees that Rhaegaro's head and his braid are there, and she gets very upset. You almost get the idea that Irri and Rhaegar were a couple. We never saw that, I don't think. At least it wasn't noticeable if they were. But Irri's very upset, like Rhaegar was her boyfriend or her husband or whatever. But she starts crying and screaming, and she says that they killed his soul, is what she says. They killed his soul because they didn't burn him, and they butchered him like an animal, and that means that he can never join his ancestors in the Nightlands. So you get an idea of their beliefs. If they don't get the funeral pyre and that kind of death that we saw Khal Drogo have before the dragons were born last season, then they think that they're like doomed to hell, basically, if you want to equate it to Christian beliefs, that they're not going to be in paradise, they're going to be in hell, or whatever, if you want to look at it that way. But, obviously that's not their beliefs, but their beliefs are that if they don't get the warrior's death like that, they're not going to go to the Nightlands and be with their ancestors. And Dany agrees to build the pyre for at least Rhaegaro's head, so that he can hopefully still join his ancestors in the Nightlands. So that's what happened with that. So things are still going really well for Dany, obviously. And then we go to Theon's arrival back at Pike in the Iron Islands, and it looks pretty cool though. But Theon is arriving back at Pike, his childhood home. And if you remember in the previous episode, he wanted to go to speak to his father, Balon Greyjoy, to get ships for Robb so that Robb can take King's Landing. But we get this another little sexposition scene or whatever. Basically, Theon's screwing around with the captain's daughter, and basically the only thing you really get from this scene is that, oh, Pike looks smaller now, and everything looks smaller when you're a kid. Everything looks bigger when you're a kid, she says. But the whole gist is Theon thinks that they're going to be like a parade or something for him. Not that the Iron Islanders have parades, but he thinks he's in store for this big, huge homecoming. The heir of the Iron Islands coming back, and everybody's going to worship him, and he's going to be the best thing that ever happened to these people, and they've all been depressed and sad since he was taken hostage by Ned Stark, and the best thing that ever happened is him coming home to the Iron Islands. So just more ideas of Theon being a pervert who is really full of himself. Just more insight into Theon's character. Speaking of people like that, we go to the brothel. We go to the brothel. And there's an unhappy client at the brothel. And, of course, Littlefinger takes care of that by taking a Remka, that foreign girl who was practicing with Roz in Season 1, taking her away from one guy and handing her to another guy, because the guy was complaining that the girl he was with was crying, and he didn't do anything, and this isn't what he paid for, and whatever. So basically, some guy was in the brothel with one of the girls, and she was crying instead of doing what she was supposed to be doing. And the girl who was crying is Roz. Yes, Roz again. I know, book people hate her. Whatever. But anyway, basically Roz was crying because, basically she's still very upset about the slaughter of Robert's bastards. Because if you remember, the very first bit we saw of that was when the City Watch came in and grabbed the little baby Bara off of Megan. We found out her name is Megan, spelled very interestingly. M-H-A-E-G-E-N. Anyway, they stole baby Bara off of Megan and just murdered the baby right there. And obviously the mother's upset, and obviously Roz is upset by seeing this as well, because it's not exactly something pleasant. So Roz is upset, because this is apparently right after that. And then we get more insight into the type of scumbag Littlefinger is. Like I said, my opinion. If you like him after this scene, hey, whatever. I mean, people that hate Roz might found this hilarious, but the gist is that he says you remind him of another girl who was beautiful and intelligent, like Roz, but she wasn't happy. And that she was from a leasing pleasure house. Lease is another place over in Essos, by the way. And that she was very expensive. So he had to pay a lot to get her to come work for his brothel or whatever. And she wasn't happy, so she wasn't making him any money. And he hates bad investments. He says they haunt him. Okay, whatever, Littlefinger. And he says he didn't know how to make this girl happy and mitigate his financial losses. So what he did was he gave her to a wealthy man who paid a whole lot of money to transform her and use her in ways that wouldn't occur to most men, and puts in, and you know what occurs to most men. And he says, oh, he didn't make her happy, but my losses were definitely mitigated. So basically, he'll have somebody torture and kill you if you don't stop having feelings and stop being sad for what happened. And says, oh, take tonight, but then tomorrow you'll be happy, right? So yeah, it's basically just a flat-out threat, saying that she's going to be in for torture and all kinds of abuse if she doesn't pretend that she's okay and go back to playing the happy little prostitute, and that's how he deals with it. Lovely Littlefinger. But anyway, then we go back to, speaking of people that kill babies, we go back to Janos Slynt. Yes, Janos Slynt. Remember I told you in the first review, or second review or something, if you watched my earlier reviews, I really don't like him. You're getting an idea of that now. But Tyrion's whining and dining him here, so to speak. Oh, this is the first time we meet Podrick Payne, who doesn't really have much in this episode, but it's our first sighting of Podrick. You'll see more of him later. But anyway, the gist of this scene is Tyrion points out that now, after Janos Slynt did all this baby murdering and child murdering and whatever, he's a lord now. And Tyrion pretends like he's just having a conversation about it, but obviously it becomes clear what he thinks real quick. He says, you know, that there's trouble at the brothel, and he wanted to hear about that, and Janos was like, oh, well, you know, it's our job to keep the peace. Orders are orders. And basically, he's Tyrion's not happy with the fact that Janice went and killed all these kids. And he says, oh yeah, so orders are orders, huh? That's why you did it. And of course, since it was the Queen's orders, and Janice says, I didn't say anything about the Queen. It's like, well, who else? And then he asks him about when they turned on Ned Stark. And Janice says, oh, the fool tried to buy me. And Tyrion says, oh, that he was so silly to think that he could buy you when you were already bought. And Janice says, oh, are you questioning my honor? I won't have my honor questioned by an imp, or something along those lines. And Tyrion has this great line, I'm not questioning your honor, I'm denying its very existence. And he basically says that since he betrayed the last son of the king, he doesn't want him around. So he sends him to the wall. He orders him to go to the wall. And Janice is saying, oh, well, we'll hear what Joffrey has to say about it. And Tyrion says, no, we won't. So he said, you can take it up with my friend, though, Bronn. Because Bronn comes in to escort him out. And he's made Bronn the new commander of the City Watch. And has told Janos he's going to the wall, period, because he doesn't trust him. So that's the gist of that scene. And it's one of my favorite scenes this season, because it's just really funny, that whole, your honor, and it's denying its existence line. And then at the end, after Janos is taken out, don't know if you can hear that, the phone's ringing, but it's an unavailable number, so who cares. Anyway, after he sends Janos out, he asks Bronn, he said, if I ordered you to murder babies, would you do it without question? And another great Bronn line, he's like, without question, no. I'd ask you how much. So, obviously Bronn's still just a sellsword, but at least he'd expect a lot of money to do something like that. I guess that's slightly better than just doing it because you were told to. I guess that's what we get from this. But anyway, yeah, this scene is I think it's almost word for word from the book. At least I remember it from the book, so, you know. Hopefully the book people don't have a big problem with this scene like they do with so many other things. But anyway, so yeah, I thought that scene was quite amusing. That's why I don't know why people say they didn't like season 2, because we get scenes like this, and Tyrion is great as the Hand. He's hilarious. But anyway, we go back to the Night's Watch now. And Arya and Gendry are having a little talk. And, well, actually, the talk starts out with Arya and Lamy and Hot Pie, and Lamy, the blonde one, Hot Pie, the heavier one, in case you didn't know that by now. And they're saying that they think that they should just yield and give them Gendry and not get into a fight, and they're basically just, you know, being little cowards or whatever. I mean, they're kids, but still. And they talk about they don't want to get involved in a battle, and Arya said, you know, you would fill your pants if you got within a mile of a battle, and Hot Pie says, oh, I've seen many battles, and she's like, what do you mean, battles? There's two guys fighting, and they were wearing armor, that makes them knights. Wait, so if they have armor on, that makes them knights? Who told you that? And Hot Pie says, a knight. And I think she says, how'd you know he was a knight? Because he had armor on. That funny little conversation. And Arya says, Gendry, tell him what makes somebody a knight, or Hot Pie, tell Gendry what makes somebody a knight, if they have armor on. And Gendry says, anybody can buy armor. And Hot Pie says, how would you know? Gendry's like, because I sold armor. So, I mean, it's not that important to the gist of things, but it is a funny little conversation. But then Arya follows Gendry and asks him why the City Watch wanted him, because she, of course, thought they were after her, and he said, I have no idea. And she calls him a liar. He says, you shouldn't insult people that are bigger than you. And Arya has a line where she says, well, then I wouldn't get to insult anybody. So, and then Gendry asks her, well, why do you think they were after you? Is it because you're a girl? So, Gendry already knows that she's a girl, and she tries to deny it. And, she just, yeah, he's already figured her out. And also, he tells her that she shouldn't ask him questions, no good's ever come from it. And she's like, what does that mean? He said, because everybody asks me questions ends up dying. And she said, who asked you questions? He says, hands of the king. Both of them came after me, and both of them died right afterwards. And because of him telling her that, and of course the hand of the king being her dad, she admits to him that her father wasn't a traitor, and that her father is Ned Stark, and that she's Lady Arya Stark. And then Gendry's like, oh my, you're a noble lady. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have been so rude, and I should be calling you my lady. And she's like, don't you dare call me my lady. So basically, the gist is Gendry knows that she's a girl, and he tells her that the Hands of the King were asking him questions, and then they got killed. Because she's trying to figure out what they wanted with him, too, because she wants to know. And because of the connection with the Hand of the King is when she admits to him who she is, and where he finds out that she's actually Arya Stark. And, of course, she warns him not to call her my lady and not to let anybody know, and she says that Yoren is taking her home to Winterfell, and that's where she believes that she's going, because the rest of them are obviously going to the Wall, and apparently Yoren had told her at some point, I don't remember it in the show, but he had told her at some point that he'd just drop her off at Winterfell on the way. Which, as we know, nobody's at Winterfell now except for Bran and Rickon and their wolves and Osha and Lewin. So, we'll see what goes on with Winterfell this season. But anyway, that's just Gendry finding out who she is and what she is and all that. So, let's see. Our next scene is Theon's actual arrival. And he had been telling the girl that he was sleeping with that he was going to be greeted like as a prince and everything. And of course, nobody's there to welcome him. Nobody at all. And some older guy is like, what's your boat carrying? He's like, wine and oranges and the heir to pike in the Iron Islands. And all the guy says is, I don't like wine. So, he don't even care. Nobody gives a crap about Theon, but of course he thinks they're all just waiting for him, and that's what they've spent the last 9 years doing, just waiting on his return. Oh, Theon. So full of himself. But anyway, he has to pay to get transportation up to the castle where his father lives. And this is where we first meet Yara, who is his escort. We don't find out her name yet, and that's another point of contention the book people have. In the book, her name was Asha. On the show, it's Yara, because I guess they said Asha and Osha were too close together, but there's a lot of names that are very similar. There's a bunch of Roberts, Robins, and Brands and Brons and whatever. But anyway, this is Yara, and she recognizes him, and of course, she's like, come along, Theon, or Lord Greyjoy or whatever, and she takes him on the horse up to the castle, and of course, since she recognized him, that's all Theon needs to be like, hey, this girl's into me, she knows who I am, or whatever. So, the whole way up there he is immediately flirting with her, and he's talking down to her like she's some kind of commoner, and saying, oh, well, you know, I'm going to be the prince of the Iron Islands, and I can rescue you from this bland, boring existence, and whatever, and just, you know, whatever. And he can't keep his hands off her the whole time. He's, like, shoving his hands in her shirt and in her pants and everything else. And she doesn't stop him, but she doesn't look very impressed. She's just got this smirk on her face the whole time, like she can't believe he's behaving this way. So you get kind of an idea that she's something she's not saying. So, this is Yara leading Theon up to the castle where Balon Greyjoy is Lord of Pike in the Iron Islands. And, Theon's still talking himself up and talking to her like she's nobody and whatever else the whole time, and hitting on her the whole time. And then they get up to the actual, castle, I guess it is, Castle Holdfast, and we meet Balon Greyjoy, Theon's dad. You can tell I like him a lot, but hey, the Kraken fireplace thing looks pretty cool. But anyway, and basically, Balon says, oh, they took a frightened boy, what have they brought back? And Theon's like, I'm your blood and your heir, that's who. And Balon says, oh, we'll see. And Balon at one point says, that Ned had him longer than he did, and how does that make him feel? He's basically trying to figure out how loyal Theon is to the Starks. And Theon says that he's got a proposal from Robb, and all Balon's talking about is the way he looks, the way he's dressed, and how he's all dressed in finery and fancy clothes, and he says, oh, was it Ned Stark's pleasure to make you his daughter? And he says that he came there because of his own idea to try to get Balon's help, and that he's the one that told Robb, and Robb treats him like a brother, and Balon's like, oh, don't you dare call him brother. Ned killed your brothers, although that's not exactly accurate. They did die, his two older brothers, they did die during the Greyjoy Rebellion, and they were fighting against Ned, but they died during, like, a building collapse was the one, and I forget how the other one died, but Ned didn't directly kill either of them. But, anyway, he says, oh, so, if Robb trusts you, why'd he send you here with a message like a trained raven, or whatever? And he basically tells, the whole time, Balon's insulting him and belittling him, and talking about the way he's dressed and doubting his loyalty, and this whole thing, where he's just making it out like it's Theon's fault that he was with the Starks when he was like 8 or 9. But anyway, and Balon's the one that gave him to him. But anyway, he says that he wants Balon to destroy Robb's armies, and then he'll make him king of the Iron Islands again, which means, you know how Robb wants the North to be an independent kingdom? He's saying he'll make the Iron Islands an independent kingdom too, and make Balon the king. And Balon doesn't want to hear that either. So he says that no man gives him a crown, and then he recites the Greyjoy words, which is, we do not sow. And Theon's trying to convince him to join Robb, and saying, he'd lead the battle himself, and man Balon's ships, and bring glory back to their name and their home, or whatever. And Balon says, oh, you're gonna do this. And Theon says, well, who else? And that's where we find out that Yara, the one who he was riding the horse with and hitting on the whole time, is actually his sister. He's Theon's older sister, and she has pretty much taken over as the heir to Balon Greyjoy. She leads his armies. She's always the one manning all the ships, and is going to be basically the heir, even though she's a girl. But he trusts her more than Theon, and it considers her his heir, because Theon's been with the Starks this whole time. Even though it was Balon's fault that Theon's with the Starks, he's basically saying, I don't trust you. You're a Stark now. You're not my son, and this is my son, even though she's my daughter. This is the one I trust. And this is my heir, and you're nothing. And so it's a really happy homecoming, basically. And also, there's a cute little thing here where he says, oh, she can't lead anything, she's a woman, or Theon says this. And Yara says, oh, you're the one in skirts. So they're still picking on his clothing and whatever else. And he tries to tell them, well, basically Balon is saying he doesn't want a crown from Robb, he'll take it himself. So it sounds like he's planning another rebellion, now that Theon's no longer with the Starks anyway. Because that was the only thing that was keeping him from rebelling before. And now Robb's no longer at Winterfell. Robb's off fighting a war, so the North is pretty much unprotected at this point. And Balon wants to take advantage of that fact. And Theon assumes that Balon wants to fight the Lannisters. And he says, oh, you'll never manage that on your own. And that's when Balon says, oh, what'd I say about anything? I didn't say anything about the Lannisters. So this is where we get the idea that Balon is planning on going after the north, since Robb is otherwise occupied. So yeah, this has went really well, huh? First of all, Theon finds out he isn't even remotely considered a part of the family anymore. His sister is now the heir, and his father is planning on going after the north, instead of helping them, going after them. So yeah, a really warm homecoming for Theon. Yep, there you go, Theon. Anyway, then we go back to Stannis' right-hand man, Davos Seaworth. And he's trying to get ships for their fight. And, this is Celador Stan, who he's talking to. And he is a pirate who has a bunch of ships to his name. And he's basically having this conversation and telling Celador Stan that if he helps them, well, if he lets them use his ships and helps them take King's Landing, he'll have all the gold he wants, because that's all Celador Stan cares about is gold. And he says that Stannis is the best chance, because he's the only one that's been on the battlefield between Renly and Robb. Well, Robb kind of has been on the battlefield, but only just in this single war, nothing before that. And he tries to convince Celador Stan that Stannis is the right one to follow, because he's a proven battle commander and the quote-unquote rightful king. Like I said, only if you believe that Robert had it right to the throne. But anyway, and he's talking about how honorable and how deserving of loyalty Stannis is. And a lot of the book people really, really are in love with Stannis. I don't get it. I don't get it at all. I don't understand it. I have not found one thing to like about Stannis, ever. Period. I've only read the first 2 books, but whatever. But it always bugs me when people say that Stannis is honorable. In 4 years of the show, Stannis has done a crapload of dishonorable things. Very shady, dark, evil, just nasty things. And the only honorable thing he's ever done was at the very end of season 4. So, yeah, I don't get how anybody thinks Stannis is honorable. But whatever. We'll see all that later. Actually, some of it we see in this episode. But anyway, the point is, see, I really like Davos. I don't like who he's standing for. It just makes no sense. But anyway, so Celador says that he wants the queen, and he has got the funny line here where Davos' fanatic son Mathos tells him, "We're not taking over King's Landing so you can rape the queen." And Celador says, "I didn't say I was going to rape her. I just want to sleep with her." And Mathos is like, "Hell, like she'd just let you." Celador says, "You don't know. I've never tried to sleep with you." Of course, he uses more colorful language than that, but it's pretty funny. Anyway, so this is still Davos talking about, Stannis being the one true king, and we get a little bit of background here where Celador says, "You Westerosi are funny people. A man cuts off your fingers and you fall in love with him," because that goes back to Stannis had cut off Davos' fingers for being a smuggler, even though Davos... The story was that during Robert's Rebellion, they were sieging Storm's End for like a year, and Stannis was holding it, and they were all starving and about to die, and then Davos came in and smuggled them food, and that's how they survived. And since he was a smuggler, Stannis punished him by cutting off his fingers, which he still wears the top half of his fingers around his neck for luck, I guess. But he cut off his fingers to punish him for being a smuggler, but then knighted him for helping them. And Davos still wears the fingers for luck. And then this is a little discussion with him and Mathos says he wants to teach him how to read, so that he can read the holy books of the Lord of Light, and then he'll understand why he should follow Melisandre. And Davos says, "No, everybody thinks their god's the right god, and none of them work, and Stannis will be my god, and not your red priestess and her god, and that's who I'm going to follow." Basically, Mathis is trying to convert him, and Davos is saying he's basically an atheist, is what it sounds like. Anyway, then we go back to Cersei and Tyrion, and she's pissed about him exiling Janos, and Tyrion tells her that she's losing the people, and she says she doesn't care about the people, and Tyrion tries to explain to her that when winter comes, half the people will starve and the other half will try to overthrow her because they hate her so much, and they're going to hate her even more now because of the whole thing she did with the killing of the babies, because that's basically what they're going to say. The queen deserves to be overthrown because she had all these babies killed, and Cersei doesn't say anything, and it's implied that Cersei had nothing to do with that order. It goes differently in the book than in the show, which is another problem book people have, but the point is, it's implied here in the show that Cersei had nothing to do with that, and that was actually Joffrey's call. Joffrey's the one. And this is where Tyrion figures that out, and finds out that Joffrey's doing stuff without even telling her what he's doing, so she has absolutely no control whatsoever over him. And she tries to defend herself with that lovely line about, this is what ruling is, lying on a bed of weeds, ripping them out one by one before they strangle you in your sleep. And Tyrion says, I'm not a ruler, but I think there's more to it than that. And she says that Jaime and Tyrion never took anything seriously, and it's all fallen on her. She's the only one in the family that takes it seriously, and that it's all fallen on her. And then Tyrion says, as has Jaime repeatedly, according to Stannis. Oh, yeah. And this is where Cersei says, oh, you're funny, aren't you? But your biggest joke was the first one. And she says, you remember that, don't you? When you ripped your way out of my mother and killed her, and mother died for the sake of you? That was the biggest joke ever, wasn't it? So yeah, you can see one of the issues that Cersei apparently has with Tyrion, even though in actuality, you can't blame a baby for his mother dying. Actually, you should probably blame the person that got the mother pregnant if you think about it. But anyway, but that's one of the things that Cersei blames Tyrion for. And people always say it's kind of ridiculous that that's the only reason she hates Tyrion. And it's not the only reason she hates Tyrion. Let's put it that way. I'm not trying to get into spoiler territory here, but it's the only reason we hear about. The only one she is willing to admit to. There is another reason she hates Tyrion. But that goes into the prophecies and dreams and visions, which they've completely cut from the show, just about every single one of them, which is my one big complaint about the show, cutting out all the prophecies and visions. But Cersei got a prophecy, and that explains a lot of why she hates Tyrion, but we won't go into that right now. I think they're actually going to talk about it in Season 5. But anyway, moving back to Stannis, and his really cool Targaryen map. It's the Targaryens made that map. That map is really cool, but the Targaryens made it. Remember, they were at Dragonstone first, before they took over. But anyway, we're back to Stannis and his cool map. And Davos telling him that Salladhor is going to help them, and Stannis says he's not trustworthy, and Davos says no, he's not, but he wants gold, and that's what he'll be loyal to, gold. And so that's just them finding out that Salladhor Saan is going to help them. And then they send Davos and Mathos away. And as they're leaving, Melisandre whispers something in Mathos' ear as they're leaving. And Stannis says, what did you say to him? And she says that she told Mathos, Davos' son Mathos, that I believe her exact words were, death by fire is the purest death. So, like I said, they cut out a lot of prophecies and visions in this show, like almost all of them. This is one of the few that they actually include. They include some stuff with Bran, and they include some stuff with Melisandre. But they've cut about just every other prophecy and dream and vision from the show, and I don't know why, and I'm not sure why, and it is my one big complaint about the show. Because the prophecies and the dreams and the visions are really cool, and there's like hundreds of them, and it's funny to try to figure out how to interpret them and see them coming true. as the show goes on. And maybe I'll do a side video about the prophecies and visions that they cut from the show, because they're really cool. But anyway, that's just one of them. Anyway, so Stannis and Melisandre are talking, and she's saying that all these armies mean nothing to the Lord of Light. And Stannis says, well, tell your Lord of Light to burn the armies out of my way. And she says that she doesn't tell the Lord of Light anything. She prays for commands, and she obeys. And Stannis says, well, 9 times out of 10, the people with more win. And she says that then we must be the 10th. And he says he can't defeat Renly, because Renly has 100,000 people, and he's got a lot less than that. And she says, I have seen your victory in the fire. Of course, we don't get whether she's talking about his victory over Renly or some other victory. But like I said, that goes back into prophecies and visions. But she says that she's seen his victory, but Stannis must give himself to the Lord of Light. And he says, I've said the words. And she says, no, you must give yourself fully to the Lord of Light. And starts taking off her clothes. And this is kind of an odd scene, because she's talking, and he says that he has a wife, and she says, oh, she's sickly, and she's weak, and she's locked away, and she's given you nothing. She's not given you any sons, she's only given you stillborns, and a daughter, but they don't mention her. And she says, I will give you a son. Now, she says she's seen his victory, but he must give himself fully to the Lord of Light, and then starts taking off her clothes and offering to give him a son. So she's implying that by having a son with her, that will assure him some sort of victory, I guess, is what she's implying here. I mean, it's you don't get it until you see the later episodes, what exactly this is all about, but that's what she's implying. That if he has a son with her, he'll defeat Renly or whoever. So, that's just that. And then, of course, he gives in to her, and they end up, you know, doing their thing on the really cool map, knocking all the pieces off, because they have all the little pieces that represent the different armies and stuff. And during the love scene, you pretty much just see them falling on the floor and stuff, the little pieces and stuff. So anyway, that's Mr. Honorable Stannis, Mr. Oh-so-honorable man, screwing some priestess who has visions and says she'll give him a son. Mr. Honorable Stannis man. Yeah. So, anyway, now we go away from Honorable Stannis cheating on his wife with some black magic chick. And after that, we're going to, can you tell that I have a real problem with people that call Stannis honorable? And this is just the first of the many dishonorable things he does, but whatever. Then after this, we go to our final scene. And, Jon is on watch at Craster's Keep. And he sees Craster sneaking out in the middle of the night. And it looks like he's got a baby or something with him. Now, remember earlier in the show, Gilly said she was pregnant, and she was really scared, and said, if it's a boy, ... And Sam wanted to try to break her out of there, flee with her. So now Craster's got a baby, and he's sneaking out through the woods in the middle of the night. And of course, Jon wants to know what's going on, because the whole time Jon's been asking, what happens to the boys? What is going on here? Where's the boys? So he follows Craster with this baby out into the woods. And you hear that really strange noise you heard in the first episode that sounds kind of like ice crackling. Like when you step on ice and it starts to crack. That noise. You hear that again. And Jon's hiding behind the tree and watching. And Craster sets out this baby and then comes back and just leaves the baby there in the middle of the woods with this ice crackling noise going on. And he comes back without the baby. And Jon has to decide, you know, to go after Craster or just go grab the baby. And he decides to go and see what's going on with the baby and why it was just left there. And that's when it's very quick. It's very hard to see. But you see a shadow like behind the trees, and when it turns you can see the bright blue eyes. And it looks like the same guy that cut off the heads of the Night's Watch in the very first episode of the very first season. It's a White Walker, or an other, as they call it in the book. It's a White Walker. And the White Walker comes and takes the baby. So now we know where the baby boys are going. The White Walkers are getting them from Craster. Craster's giving those babies to the White Walker. And when Jon turns around, Craster's behind him and knocks him out. And that's how the episode ends. So, I tried to stay away from my notes, but ended up going back in a little bit, but still. Anyway, this is the end of the episode. Episode 202, The Nightlands. So, there you have it. What's going on in this episode. And, like I said, earlier in the episode, my one main problem with the show, I usually don't have many complaints about the show at all. The only complaint I really do have is the fact that they cut out all these dreams and prophecies, and they're so interesting, and they tell you so much about where the story's going, and it's not even really like they're spoilers. Yeah, they're prophecies, but they can be interpreted so many different ways. And when you see the ones that have come true at this point in time, 9 times out of 10, you don't realize the prophecy has come true until it does, because it comes true in a completely different way than how you imagined it would come true. So like I said, they're not exactly spoilers, because you think that the prophecy means one thing, and then something else happens that does fit the prophecy, but it's not anything like what you imagined. And like I said, the prophecies and the visions and the dreams are a very, very big part of the show. And they've cut out almost all of them. I mean, we get a couple here and there with Bran, and a couple with Melisandre. But they cut out a lot of them. And like I said, a lot of people had a problem with Daenerys' storyline this season. And my only problem with Daenerys' storyline this season was at the very end of the season, which deals with what I'm talking about, the dreams and the prophecies, because there's a point where there's this 20 pages in the book of dreams and prophecies that Daenerys receives, and in the show, we don't see any of that. And they're all really important to the entire arc of the entire book series, and it just really bugs me that they've cut them all out. And like I said, I don't usually complain about the show. I don't have that many problems, but that is my one complaint about the show. I wish they would leave those dreams and prophecies in, because they're very important and they're very interesting. And they tell you a lot about what might happen, how it might happen, but they don't tell you for sure. It just gives you so much to speculate about and think about. And I might do another video just about the dreams and prophecies. Of course, it will be somewhat spoilery, because they're prophecies, and some of them have come true. And they are only in the book, not in the show. But they're very interesting, and like I said, it's not specifically spoilery, because they're all open to interpretation. But they're really interesting, so I might go in and do that. So, we'll see. Meanwhile, watch for my next review. Bye, all.